On these beaches of Lurin, Father Joseph Walijewski meditated, speaking with God, pouring his heart out, looking for answers to his difficult mission, that of guiding thousands of people in the daily physical and spiritual fight to survive in the middle of a desert without light and water. The image of two sleeping children on the cold sidewalk on the streets of Lima awoke in the missionary the dream he'd had in his heart since childhood of the urgent necessity to open an orphanage for abandoned children, a dream that he made reality. The missionary was able to make them smile again, to play again, to swing again in the gardens of their faraway memories, with solutions for life, with new dreams. Join us to understand the life of Father Joseph Walijewski, missionary that so dearly loved the poor and Peru, a priest following God's will and under the protection of Our Lady of Czestochowa, my beloved disciple. On April 11, 2006, Father Joseph Walijewski met his Lord at the age of 82. A saint was born unto us. A saint has lived with us, and a saint has died among us. Father Joe was a hero in Villa El Salvador. He was the founder of that parish, the first parish of Villa El Salvador. He was an exemplary priest, humble, simple, very committed. He didn't look for publicity, but was generous and always said yes when it came to helping. Father was humble, brave, and wise. He was very simple and he cared for the people. He could be talking to the president or to someone of low social standing. He treated everyone the same. With the founding of Casa Hogar Juan Pablo II, he achieved the dream that he'd kept in his heart from childhood, becoming a father for hundreds of abandoned and orphaned children. He always tried to make us feel better, that a child felt part of a family, part of a home. He made me feel like I was part of a home, even to this day. I am who I am because of him. At the beginning of the last century, Frank and Mary Walijewski immigrated from Poland to the United States of America, establishing themselves in the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. On March 15 of 1924, the ninth of 11 children was born and baptized with the name of Joseph Walijewski. He, like his brothers, was raised in the warmth of this home, where they maintained the beautiful Polish tradition. He was born to a family with deep Catholic roots and served at Mass and celebrations. Joe, at an early age, felt the deep call to become a priest and serve the poor. His mother, Mary, was a woman of great faith and prayer. She kept 3 wishes in her heart: to have a son that would become a priest, for him to build a church dedicated to Saint Joseph, and that she would die on the feast of Saint Joseph. As the years grew increasingly difficult, the Walijewskis had a lot of needs. His mother was very poor, but she taught him many lessons. Sometimes he didn't have shoes, so he'd walk around without shoes, selling newspapers. In our family, we were poor. There were 9 of us. We had a lot of problems, a lot of difficulties, economic problems. I know what it means to be without food, not to be able to count on any means of support. It was like this. At the age of 5, little Joe supported his family by selling newspapers on the streets of Grand Rapids, under the intense summer sun and the snow of the harsh winters. He loved the theater and really enjoyed the few occasions he could go when he had enough money to buy a ticket. The movie Boys Town, starring Mickey Rooney, impacted him strongly and inspired him to one day open an orphanage for abandoned and orphaned children.
It was the one man who could save him.
The movie he saw was about Boys Town, an organization founded by an Irish priest that was established as a home for street children in the United States. His idea of creating a home, a house, a family for children in need was in his head from childhood. From a very young age, Joe studied philosophy at St. Mary's College in Orchard Lake, Detroit. Very humbly, he used to always talk to us about his priestly vocation, that he always wanted to be a priest. He went to the Franciscan order. At that time, his studies were in Latin. I don't think that would have been easy for anyone. But school was never easy for him. Nevertheless, he finished his studies, but then the Franciscans told him he wouldn't be able to be ordained as a priest, but he could be a Franciscan brother. He never wanted to do that. He wanted to be a priest. Disillusioned, but not defeated, he insisted and was accepted by the Diocese of La Crosse in Wisconsin, and he enrolled in the seminary one more time. I had a few problems while I studied at the seminary. Maybe God didn't give me the intelligence or the talent He'd given other people. I really struggled with my studies. So I promised God that if I reached the priesthood, I would dedicate 8 years of my life to the poor through missions. His request was heard, and on the 16th of April, 1950, Joseph Walijewski was ordained as a priest in the presence of his proud family. Under Bishop John Tracy, he was initially assigned to St. Bernard St. Hedwig's Parish in the Diocese of La Crosse in Wisconsin. In July of 1951, he was named assistant at the Church of St. Peter in Stevens Point, a position he held for 5 years. In 1956, Father Joseph received the permission from his bishop to travel to South America for 3 years, and in this way fulfill the promise he made to God during his time in seminary, that of serving Him by serving the poor and the most in need. Father Joseph Walijewski left his life in the United States and headed to Santa Cruz, Bolivia. Headed to one of the poorest areas of Santa Cruz, He was the founder of the parish of Santa Cruz, serving the poorest neighborhoods. The parishioners always talk about how the church collapsed 3 times. That's why it's called Santa Cruz, of the 3 falls of the Lord under the weight of the cross. This demonstrates either his perseverance or his Polish character, or both things, because Father Joseph was very persevering, and this is kind of a virtue in Poland. 9 years later, the missionary was sent to Ecuador, where he stayed for 2 more years, heading next to Peru. In 1971, Father Joseph Walijewski was named the first pastor of the first chapel in a shantytown in the outskirts of Lima. It was an area that was taking shape in the middle of a desert, located in the lower section of Lurín, called Villa El Salvador. Most of the population spoke Quechua, coming from Moraz, where they lost everything because of the earthquake of 1970. Because Lima was impossible to survive in due to the rising cost of living, this group of immigrants had then decided to move to the suburbs as squatters. I was the bishop of the slums when the invasion of Pamplona Alta took place. It was very unusual, not a typical invasion. There were many difficult situations. There were deaths, many injuries, lots of violence. But we already had Luis Vargas Caballero with the Minister of Housing. We already had all but was Villa El Salvador, without name, but it was a town that had an industrial zone, a market, and all the other services that a town needs, like health and education, and so we planned the move of the people to this area. This could give the impression that one is standing on the moon. This is the impression I got when I first got here from Wisconsin. And to think that 200,000 people would come to build their homes in this place. Many times, I would think about how people could find hope in this desert. Coming from the mountains to find a new hope, a new way of life. We came in the month of May, and it was still all shacks, sandy, and we would get lost. Sometimes when we went out, we didn't know where our shack was. The immigration to Villa El Salvador was on May of 1971 and July of 1971. And the Cardinal Landazuri named me pastor on Christmas Eve of 1971, also of the parish Cristo El Salvador. That's where the chapel was, made out of bamboo mats and 4 posts. Father Joe himself made the plans. He drew them. Out of everything that Villa El Salvador was, of all the areas of Villa El Salvador, the parish priest was Father Joe. Some wanted to say that it was the biggest parish in Latin America. Father Joe was a kind of father, kind of a grandfather to all of Villa El Salvador. The missionary was giving them their future, marking a style of life different in the people around him. On the personal and professional level, the village saw industrial growth as the years passed by. He played a very important role, not just as pastor in what is a testament of faith, but also on a social level, the cultural level, of the identity of the whole village. Father Joseph Walijewski, missionary priest from the Diocese of La Crosse in Wisconsin, came to Peru, fulfilling the promise he'd made to the Lord, that of serving the most poor in South America. He was a man very committed to God. He was a priest of simple faith and taught us a lot. He taught me everything about my faith. I learned to live with more humility, with more caring, because before I didn't do that. In 1971, he was named the first pastor of the first chapel of Villa El Salvador, a large shanty town on the outskirts of Lima. He has been a very important figure for the village, in such a way that the people of this village have the initiative to move forward. Cardinal Landazuri said that one should always work with them. And because of this, Father Joe's place was always next to him in his work. Father Joe, as they lovingly called him, lived in a little shack like his parishioners. And day to day, he helped them build theirs with materials that he bought, little by little, with what he received through donations. Well, my role as a priest is to know how to do everything here. I have to support them in every way I can. I have to drive them when there is an emergency. Day and night, I should be ready and able to guide them. I came here not to be served, but to serve. It just so happened that the year he came, I got sick with this leg. I had a tumor, and they had to operate. My father was always there, helping me, supporting me, protecting my children, because I was a widow, so I was alone then, and Father never stopped lending me a hand. He was like that, generous with everyone. Any person could come to him, asking for help, and he would never say no. He never sought out attention, but yes, he was very generous in saying yes and helping. For example, in Villa El Salvador, when it was just beginning, the only car in town was Father Joe's red Volkswagen. So there were many nights when he had to work as an ambulance and went out in search of the sick to take them to get help. His house basically became the center of help. Father at this time had a little Volkswagen car and drove his car all around Villa El Salvador. The Volkswagen of Father Joe was really famous in Murin, and sometimes, as there weren't any roads or they needed repairs, he went from the curb of Nueva Esperanza to the parish, and he said it was the widest street on the planet. He went throughout the whole desert in the Volkswagen to be able to help people, always serving any time of the day. He really cared about the people, and he suffered what they were suffering as Villa El Salvador started to grow. Father Joe continued building the first chapel of the village, and at the same time, he was building hope in the hearts of the people. I feel like I receive more from the people than I can give them. Some way or another, I have received a lot. Not just that. I feel like I'm really living my faith. The sacraments had a special place in his ministry. When he came, there was nowhere to celebrate, so we went up to help him. 2 groups came down. We took the tables out to celebrate Mass, borrowing tablecloths, and he did the Mass in groups. In this way, the community felt invited to get to know our priest. He had come here, and it was important to be with him, to hear the Word of God. Many times, he celebrated baptisms and community weddings, but he also did emergency baptisms when the fragile, undernourished children agonized in the arms of their weeping mothers. Everything that he did here marked all of history. As he accompanied them, he was part of all the work in the village. If there was a death, he was present. And if there was no way to bury the deceased, he worked with them. And if there was nowhere to have a vigil, he offered his home so that they could mourn.
Descanso eterno y la luz perpetua alumbre. Liberame, Domine, de morte eterna.
He's with the Lord now, because this priest was truly a saint. So many times he was robbed, but he never reported them. So many times they did things. He tried to reach people. He tried to change people. But he was never demanding, never complaining. We kept telling them, Father, you have to report them, because they're going to get used to it and continue doing this. No, no, he said. We have to reach out to them, counsel them, make them see their faults. For me, the hardest thing is to listen to the suffering of the people. What can I do to help them? I'm just one person. There's 200,000 in El Salvador. Not a lot come together, but people come every day with their problems. Father, my house burned down, and I don't have anywhere to go. The families are homeless, and I have to find a home for them. This constantly happens. What can I do? If I was God, I could turn the sand into bread so they could eat. But I'm just a man. Many times, the missionary needed to find solace in the nearby beaches, to meditate, to pray in silence. Alone, I cry for the people that come to me. The priesthood is a solitary life. People sometimes ask, where do you go with your problems? It's hard sometimes. I can only tell God and trust Him with my problems. He suffered a lot when there were abandoned women. I think this affected him a lot. Sometimes he'd say, I don't understand. He was very tough in his homilies, especially with the men. He defended the women always. What he worried about was the problem of the women. They needed to work to have an income to help their children. And he was so involved with their learning and productivity. Very good, he said. You'll be in charge of finding work, and I'll be in charge of continuing forward. And that's what we did. It was a question of navigating the terrain. He was a very good man. He financed the construction of this big job. He got the tools that they didn't have and kept working month after month with the money that he had left over. This was Father Joe's way of social assistance. When they released me from the hospital 9 months later, he told me that he was going to open a sewing co-op. All of the mothers that didn't have work, we could all work there. And for men that didn't have jobs either, he was opening a shoe workshop. They fixed shoes. And everyone had the opportunity to have a decent job with Father Joe. He helped women with their cooking classes, the young ones with cosmetology and baking. Also, he started a library. He also helped families dealing with illness. He had 120 women that met with him every Thursday to be able to coordinate all the programs they were doing in El Salvador. Basically, during the time of the parish in El Salvador, he had 40 soup kitchens. He helped thousands of children. The work he did was very good, and he loved them a lot. He was very connected to his people. His daily concern was feeding the children so they wouldn't miss out on their nutrition, their bread, their milk. The soup kitchens were concerned with providing free nutrition, like milk, which they always had. And he made breakfasts. It was such a joy for him. He loved seeing the children every day. He provided shelter for the children more than anything. I know what it means to be without food, to not be able to count on any support. I like to go to the theater, and when I see the kids, I imagine they'd like to go too. I feel part of them, and I tell them, let's go see a movie. It's like this. We take a whole group of kids to the movies. Things like this make me feel part of them, because I too was poor when I was young. Maybe not as much as them, but for this reason, I'm here. Father Joe meant a lot to me. When I was 14 years old, my mother, abandoned with 3 children from her second marriage, of which I was one. And at the moment when Father Joe opened his arms to me, for me it was something I couldn't believe. It was like a light towards something where I wasn't going to get lost. He was going to have me in his hands, and it was like that. He picked me up. He helped me. It was a place that I held on to. I held on to the church. I held on to his house, to his ministry. And it was from that point on that he began to create this amazing place. One day, while he was walking throughout the streets of Lima, Father Joseph saw some pieces of newspaper moving on the sidewalk. He looked and realized it covered some children that were sleeping underneath. And he thought to himself, how can I go home to a comfortable bed knowing that thousands of children are out here on the streets, sleeping on the sidewalks, hungry, without hope in their hearts? So I thought I should do something about that. I'd always had the idea of opening a home, so I thought now was the time to start. So I went to the Cardinal of Lima, and I told him I wanted to resign as pastor of the church that I had built and where I'd been for 17 years. I knew it was time to start a home for abandoned children. In 1985, when His Holiness John Paul II came to Peru, he also visited El Salvador. The last leg of the visit of the Pope was perhaps the most exciting of his tour in Peru. It began in El Salvador, where over 2 million people waited in vigil starting the night before. I wish that you will not be hungry for the daily bread, but that you are hungry for God, not for bread. This humble, brave, and wise priest identified completely with the poor, sheltering the children of the streets. It was up to him to host the Pope. Father Joe was happy. I think it was the best gift God could have given him to receive the Pope in his parish. Everyone knew him as Polish, but in those days, his Polish wasn't so good. After so many years, he'd forgotten his Polish. The Archbishop of Lima asked him to welcome the Pope in Polish. Father said he could only remember a poem that he had learned as a child in school. The Pope listened and smiled. He knew it was a children's poem. That's how he made it through the situation. His Holiness, John Paul II, completely moved by the extreme poverty of the shantytown, gave Father Joe the sum of $50,000 so he could start an orphanage as soon as possible, a refuge to shelter and feed these children, a place where they could find happiness. Father Joseph Walijewski, missionary priest of the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin, came to Peru, fulfilling the promise he'd made to the Lord, that of serving the poorest in South America. He had a saying that went patience, patience, and more patience. He was a very gentle person, very sweet, very loving person. Right? Everybody from all races, they clung to him. He was never bitter. Never. His face, his sweet smile, right? People always said he was the Pope's cousin. If you picture the Pope with Mother Teresa, they're so sweet. Yeah, and I think Father Joe, too, very similar to God. I can see that when I met Father Joe, I realized that he identified himself with one of these children as Christ nailed to the cross. And if you do not become like children, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. When Jesus said this, he also added that whatever you do to one of these little children, you do to me. These verses of the gospel brought to my realization who Father Joe really was. Thanks to the economic assistance of His Holiness, John Paul II, Father Joe could make his dream come true of creating an orphanage for the orphans and abandoned children in Lurín. This was my dream my whole life, of having an orphanage for kids, orphaned kids. In March of 1987, in the presence of His Eminence, Cardinal Juan Landazuri Enriquez, Casa Hogar Juan Pablo II was inaugurated. A refuge to shelter and feed these children, a home where they find happiness.
La felicidad.
We don't only receive those who are orphans, those who do not have a mother or father, but there are also cases of kids who are at high risk. For example, they may have a mother who is a drug addict, or a father that has abandoned the family. So we'll take them in. Because if we don't take these children who are considered high risk, then these children in the future will become street children. Many of the children have never known the warmth of a home, and Father Joe worked to make them feel that they had a family there. He always made sure that I was feeling fine, more than anything. And just like me, I think all the other kids felt that. He was an excellent person in every way. He really affected my life. For me personally, in terms of my spiritual growth, he gave me a lot of strength. Because all the things that I've done, I wouldn't have been able to go on with them without the spiritual strength that he gave us. And now I can continue that with my children and with the children of Casa Hogar in every opportunity I'm given. My parents died 20 years ago. They were poisoned. As we were orphans, there were 5 of us, too many to be in a family with my aunts and uncles. so they could take us in for a few days, a week, but not always because of their financial situation. It was very difficult. And so when I came here, well, the first thing that they did was bring us to Father Joe. And I remember that all my siblings started to cry because we didn't want to stay. But then little by little, in the next week, I adjusted. And more than anything, Father was always there for us. Had Father not been there for us, I wouldn't have adjusted, and I would have escaped and all those things. But yes, he was always there, like I said before, attentive to everything we needed, and to all the kids at Casa Hogar. Even though they were restless and behaved badly, he always tried to help them change, or maybe give them more opportunities, and all that. The children hugged him, their little legs dangling. It was their home. Father Joe was their dad, and all were brothers and sisters. The nightmares, screams of fear in the night, as they relived their lives before, became things of the past. They were healing with love. The kids continued to find peace, dignity of being children of God. The missionary always reminded the staff at Casa and the family teachers the words of God. One that receives a child in my name also receives me. The most important thing for the children here is love, because everything stems from that. Food and health are also important, but if you don't have love on the inside, you will not be okay. Father Joe gave affection and confidence to every child who came to the home. His priestly authority was a permanent presence in every step of the children's development through the celebration of the sacraments. Here, what is very different is that I always wanted to help develop morality in our children. I always say that a person can be very advanced intellectually or physically, but your moral development is very important as well. For that reason, our kids go to Mass every day. They wake up a little earlier, of course, at 5, and they go to Mass and have the opportunity to receive the sacraments. We believe that they have to be close to God, and it is He who helps us with His grace in our moral development. At Casa Hogar, Juan Pablo II, they teach in daily life an alliance with Holy Mary, looking for coherence between faith and customs, a path that leads to a moral cure. When I go to Mass, there's an image of Our Lady of Czestochowa. She's always there. She is the patron of our chapel. I always pray to her, talk to her. In the case of our kids who come from broken families, many times it is also the case that the kids feel rejected by their mothers, if their mothers are still alive. So they're living with us, and we help them to remember that the Virgin Mary is the mother of all of us, and that in her we will always find the affection and the example and the love of Christ, because it is her. She is going to bring us closer to Him.
Gracias, Madre mía, por llevarnos a Jesús.
The boys and girls are divided into groups of 8 under the care, love, and discipline of their family teachers. They have a daily life like in any home. Apart from the 8 children I have from Casa Hogar, I have 3 biological daughters. They live with us just the same as others. It's the same treatment with all of them. It's a responsibility. It's a vocation that you need to be here, to have 8 children and fulfill the role of parents. We have a huge responsibility of giving them care and love, helping them in school, the academic aspect, as well as their health. What do you like best about Casa Hogar? My parents. Well, first of all, we have to get to know these girls. You have to win their trust. Once you have their trust, it's a great opportunity to ask them about their needs, their problems, or any worries they might have. Thanks to that trust, we obtain many tools to help them resolve their problems. It's basically living in the family with the kids, giving them an example so that when they get married, they know how a parent should treat their children, or one spouse to another. But there are 5 essential aspects. We want to teach social skills, to help build healthy relationships, self-government, the formation of values in spiritual life, and to live in family. They teach us how to behave well. If we do something, we fill in our cards and we won't get our privileges, and we'll go to sleep. And if we have our privileges, we can watch TV, play, or go out to the field, or to listen to the radio. I'm 15 years old, and I've already been at Casa Hogar for 8 years. I'm happy to have come here, because here you can be protected from everything that happens out in the streets. Because not having parents that love you like they should, we now have people who take care of us and protect us with that love. They see us as their children, and they really love us. Thinking about everything, like they say, the love of a family is different from the love of people who do not know us. That means a lot, because here they give us the affection and the help that almost no child can have that lives on the streets. Looking in prayer for a confirmation from heaven in his priestly vocation, Sebastian Walijewski, a young Polish man, traveled to Peru in 1990. Yes, I was looking for a place where I could get back en route with my priestly vocation again. When I came here, I met Father Joe. Then I entered into the chapel, and I saw on the wall an image of Our Lady of Czestochowa, which is my birth city. It's a sanctuary of the Black Virgin in Czestochowa. So I felt very excited. It was like a sign for me that it was God's way of guiding me all these years so that I would end up here. In 2000, Father Joe Walijewski left Casa Hogar Juan Pablo II in Father Sebastian's hands. This also showed the humility of Father Joe. I know that it was very hard for him, and that it was also something for me that confirmed his great personality of a saint. When I came here to take the position, which he also wanted me to do, it was still hard for him to decide to move to Oxapampa, where we still had a house with a couple of families. There, he worked tirelessly to bring the Eucharist to the remote villages. He founded a soup kitchen in Chontabamba, 9 kilometers from Oxapampa. Many people asked him, "Father, aren't you tired?" He always replied, "Tired, but not retired." There were many special things about him, but what impressed me the most was his sense of humor. They would say, "Look at the great things you did, Father." And he would say, "I didn't bring my wallet, so just calm down." On April 11, 2005, Father Joe Walijewski founded what was his final dream, a nursing home in Chontabamba, then leaving the establishment under the care of the Josephine Sisters of Charity. Once a month, Father Joe would return to Lurin to see how his kids were doing. It was during
durante
this
su
last visit
última visita
that he
que
became
él
gravely
cayó
ill.
gravemente enfermo.
He hadn't told anyone, not even to me, and I was practically his geriatrics doctor. He would consult me and everything, but I never guessed that he had leukemia. It was a terminal illness, and we never knew. Father Joe began to have difficulty breathing, and the missionary died 24 hours later. Orphans, old and young, many of them now living successful lives with careers, came to give their last goodbyes to their beloved Father Joe.
A su amado Padre José.
When I was sick, he helped my kids. He helped them with their studies. I will forever be thankful to him. I always remember him in my prayers. I will never forget him. I think that I will never be able to thank him for what he did for me. Then I would tell him that I love him. I wish that he was still here. As he said, I'm a pencil in God's hand. That is the view that he had. He gave everything without receiving anything. And I'm sure that one day he will become a saint, that he'll be remembered as a saint. Thank you, Father Joe. We'll always remember you. Father Joe, with his beautiful work, changed my life. That's why I'm here. For me, he was, more than anything, an example of love and giving. But more than anything, he was an example of how to be willing to do anything that is the will of God, even if that means leaving everything, your country, your family. When he calls you, you need to answer. I owe him my priesthood. If it wasn't for him, I don't know what I would be doing or where I would be. I am very privileged to be able to follow in his steps and to continue his work. It is really a privilege and a gift from God. And I hope that he's going to intercede for us up there in heaven. You know, there's an old saying, do what you can, and the Lord will do the rest. I think up there, my friend, he's going to help me with this problem.
Gracias,
Thank you,
querido
beloved Father
Padre
Joe,
José.
in the name of
de
every
cada
child
niño sin
without a
padre ni
father
madre,
or mother,
en nombre de
in the
cada
name of
niño
every
y
child
adulto
and
que
every adult
acercaste
who gets
a Dios,
closer to God,
enriqueciendo
enriching
su
their
fe
lives,
y
their faith,
dándole un
and giving meaning
sentido
to
a
their
su vida.
lives.
Gracias,
Thanks, in the
en
name of every
nombre de
citizen
cada ciudadano con
with a
una vida
plain,
transparente,
fair, and honest life
justa y honesta
that you formed
que
with the love of the
formaste con
Father.
amor de Padre.
Thank you, Father Joseph Walijewski, dearly beloved Father Joe, that Peru was able to identify with your sweet words. My beloved disciple.